Hello, everyone, and welcome to another BHDC as the Brooklyn Health Disparity Center's Voices podcast entitled From Southeast San Diego to the Houston, Texas. I am Dr. Moro Salifu. I'm director of the Brooklyn Health Disparity Center and also chair of the medicine department at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. I would lead this discussion. We are very pleased and honored to speak to Dr. Ezemenari M. Obasi today. He's a wonderful scientist coming from Houston to Downstate to participate in the transport symposium today, which we have just concluded. Dr. Obasi is currently a tenured professor at the University of Houston, where he leads groundbreaking research on the neurobiology of stress, alcohol and drug abuse, health disparities that disproportionately affect the African American community, and cultural predictors of health behaviors. He directs the Hemodua Addictions and Health Disparities Lab, a biosafety level 2 laboratory, and has led or participated in over $34 million of innovative science funded by the National Institute of Health, United Health Foundation, and the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas. Throughout the years, his career has been spectacular. Through his early years of community activism, leadership, and strong mentorship network, he decided to pursue a profession that would better position him to be a change agent for addressing health challenges in underserved communities. He went on to earn a PhD in psychology at the Ohio State University, where he completed his clinical internship at Harvard Medical School, McLean Hospital. Today, we will focus on how Dr. Obasi started in Southeast San Diego and over the course of his education and career has wound up in Houston, Texas, with a focus on health inequities. So I'm going to be having this nice discussion with Dr. Obasi with the goal that, viewers listen to myself and Dr. Obasi will be motivated and would learn a lot to be able to learn some lessons and then help people who have health disparities in this country. So thank you, Dr. Obasi, and welcome to this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, so I really want this conversation to motivate the listener. I hope that we have high school students, we have college students, maybe postgrad students and junior faculty members listen to this conversation. And I want this conversation to be motivational to them. I want them to listen to your story, how you did it, what your experiences were growing up that made you to end up in health disparities research and as a staunch scientist in the country in this area. So we will start with your early school years, high school. Could you give us a little briefing on how that went?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southeast San Diego in a very poor neighborhood, to say the least. Oftentimes I describe it as being in a space where we had to depend a lot on free food. So I would have to go to the park to get meals, lived off of government assistance and did the best that we could to get by. I think, one of the things that's probably different about my path is I never grew up with this imagination of going to college or becoming a professor. I just wanted to be alive when I was growing up. And it took my mom to basically tell me I couldn't play in my football game if I didn't take the SATs that Saturday. And from there, it sort of set the ball in motion to get options to pursue higher education. And ultimately, the decision to go to college was more so the decision to get out of the extreme violence that I was surrounded around in the neighborhood. And so luckily, because I took the SATs, I qualified to go to various different schools in the University of California system and pursued physics originally because I was good at math and that's all I knew.
Wow. Very nice. Then tell us more about the college years and then the graduate years.
All those things are interesting blur. I remember, people today talk about food insecurity. I remember times going into the cafeteria, which is all you can eat 3 times a day. But I would bring food back into my dorm because I wasn't used to being able to have access to food all the time. Something in my mind said, food won't be there, so take some with you when you go back. And so it was a big transition to sort of go from a world where I assumed everybody had this difficult life to being around others who knew nothing about that world and trying to figure out where do I belong sort of in that space. I think at the University of California system, as you can imagine, there weren't a whole lot of African American students there. Trying to find that space, trying to figure out how to navigate issues of racism and discrimination, even dealing with being racially profiled, by police departments because of the activism that we were doing on campus to try to raise awareness to issues that were important to us. And so all those things just really told me that I needed to figure out a way to give back versus just pursuing something I was good at, like physics.
Wow. So did you find anyone in college, I don't mean the postgrad, in college, that was a mentor to you throughout the 4 years?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you mentioned earlier, I did end up going to grad school at I have to say, the Ohio State University, in psychology, and in part because I had a mentor when I was at UC Irvine who was a psychologist, and he was a very influential psychologist, so I was very lucky to have access to him, president of national organizations and so forth. And based on some of the work I was doing in the African American community on campus, he was like, "Oh my goodness, you could be a big change agent. Have you considered some of these other professions?" And so that's when I started to do. I was doing research in physics labs, but also began to take on some psychology research experiences as well, and felt that I was a better fit for what I wanted to be, sort of my impact on the world.
Excellent. So now let's go to the graduate years. So how long was the training to be a psychologist?
4 years in Columbus, Ohio, and then 1 year for internship, and that's where I went to Harvard Medical School at McLean Hospital, which was a really eye-opener to kind of see the axis of technology and innovation, sort of being in a place that didn't have to worry about resources, and to see where the mind can push science in real ways. And so I was very appreciative of that experience. Was offered to stay on to be a researcher there, but I really wanted to get back into academia to sort of advise students and teach all those things that you thought you were passionate about. And so I decided to end the internship when it ended, got my PhD, and went straight into academia.
Right, very nice. So let's talk about mentorship while you were in your graduate school years. Did you find anyone that you sort of wanted to emulate, you wanted to be like when you finish your PhD?
It's interesting. All of my mentors, and starting with Thomas Parham at UC Irvine, he would sort of connect me with other folks across the country. So I had sort of a family of mentors, and they all would tell me if I was like them, they failed me. Wow. Because they wanted me to be bigger and better than anything that they accomplished. And so I took that to heart. Tried to figure out ways in which I can sharpen my skill set to sort of maximize the impact that I can have on the community, and also bring that same energy to students that I engage. You've been given a lot, you've had things I didn't have access to, so I expect you to do more with the privileges that you've inherited in comparisons to where I came from.
Wow, that's nice. Obviously, everything begins with, you start the process, then you hit some roadblocks. There are some success stories, failure stories during the graduate years. Could you describe, if any, you tried to do something, you just couldn't do it, and why was it now possible later on to be able to do it?
Interesting question. I think sometimes folks would ask me things like, were these experiences stressful or difficult and things of that nature? I think if you grew up where I grew up, all these things that I've experienced as a graduate student is extremely easy. They're not life or death. They're not basic needs issues. These are more privileged challenges. And so oftentimes I've found that if you get a no, you have to figure out how to be creative to figure out another proposal to put on the table. And so I think growing up in a space where you had to be resilient to make it is something I've always took with me. Mm-hmm. So I never took no for an answer. There would be people that would say, "Oh, you're being a little bit too ambitious." And my response would be, well, if you knew where I came from, you probably would argue that it would have been too ambitious to think I would be here today.
That's right.
And so I continue to push myself. I continue to try to make this world a better place for those that come after me. And sometimes doing the hard work is what your contribution is.
Very nice. All right, so now let's move from the graduate years to you being a junior faculty member. So when you started as, for the first time as a junior faculty member, what were the challenges? Did you see yourself like in a very nice, silver platter, just, starting a career, everything's there for you to do it? Or did you have to re-engineer, like discover things on your own?
So essentially, I had to create everything from scratch. And this is another thing I talk to my students about. There weren't people doing what I was passionate about when I was in graduate school. And so I found ways of getting little pieces that I can later put together in a bigger puzzle. So whether it's getting a minor in stats or, going to Harvard Medical School and learning neuroimaging and various, biomarker techniques. And so when I got my first job, it was really a conversation between University of Wisconsin in Madison, Penn State University, and Southern Illinois University. I went to Southern Illinois University because they allowed me to pursue my imagination in an unrestricted way. It wasn't about the brand of the school. It was about having the freedom to think, right? And so in that space, I didn't feel like I had a silver platter. I felt like everything had to be constructed from scratch. I would write grant applications and it wouldn't even be discussed. The same experience that other folks have. I'm normal just like everyone else. It took me probably 4 years to fully understand grant writing, and by that time I was at the University of Georgia. And then once I found that formula and sort of had the sort of institutional support that I needed, things began to take off then.
So for a junior person listening to this story, you had 5 years of PhD, then you become a junior faculty member, then you have another 4 years of trying to figure out how to write your first grant. That's remarkable. What will you tell them?
Well, you got to deal with rejection, right? Every time you write a research paper, I'm pretty sure a journal told you no. And you either decide to be responsive to the reviewer feedback or you go to a different journal. And the same is true with pursuing grant applications. I think you have to really dig in, do excellent work. I think you have to take your time in your grant writing. It's not something you can just throw together because you heard that this call is here. I'm going to spend 3 weeks and put together an application. You're competing against people who have been writing for 8 months. And so attention to detail matters. When you get the reviewer feedback, that stuff matters, to be responsive and not feel so arrogant to believe that I'm going to do it my way and justify it.
Exactly.
And then relationship building. I think reaching out to program officers and putting a face in front of them to say, hey, this is who I am. This is the work I'm trying to do. This is why I think you should invest in me.
Right.
And so I think it's not a passive process. It's a lot of active engagement, resiliency, all those things. And then once you get over that hump, I think you have greater confidence. And then you sort of have a playbook to sort of build off of. And then I often tell folks, serve on study sections so that you can see what's being funded and how people are writing, and imagine ways in which you can improve as well.
Excellent. So let's explore two things. One of them is that you entered academia as a assistant professor, and now you are a full professor. You also entered academia as a junior faculty member, and now you are the associate vice president for research of a whole university. Those are two remarkable accomplishments. So I want to explore each of them separately. To navigate from the level of assistant to associate professor to full professor, how was that like? And can you tell someone who has the same ambition how to do it?
It's interesting. I've been very consistent, I think, in how I think about promotion and tenure. I believe that if you pursue excellence and you work hard, the system will reward that hard work. But you also need to know what the system is looking for. You need to have a plan for how are you going to accomplish what you know the university is looking for. And so I was never really stressed out about the PNT process, in part because I had a sense of what it was needed in order for it to not even be a debate. I knew that grant funding was a valuable thing. And so I put a lot of energy into ensuring that I was one of the top grant getters, in college. And then things like publications. While I probably could have had way more publications, for me, quality was most important. And so I took my time to write more impactful papers in high-impact journals so that I can make the case that I'm truly making an impact on the field. So very strategic in how I use my time and energy, but also had a mentality that I recognize I'm a young black male and that I must exceed expectations in order for it to not be a challenge later on.
Yes.
And so because of that, I think the process went fairly smooth. I had a lot of collaborative work. I made sure I didn't do the hard stuff first. Oftentimes faculty want to jump right into that community engaged work, which is time consuming, and it takes a long time to finish things. And while you're doing that networking and trust building, you still got to publish papers.
Right.
And so having different streams of research so that you can build one thing long term, but still have productivity happening in a short term with something that I found to be very valuable as well. But I mean, all these things, they come with blessings to be able to make a positive impact, and it come with challenges too, where you have to deal with faculty that says, well, why is he getting that, and why does he have all that, and why does, so you deal with that aspect of the job as well. But I think ultimately focusing on why I'm here gets me through all the noise.
Very nice. So let's explore the other angle. Obviously, navigating the administrative ladder to become the Associate Vice President for Research is a big deal. I mean, it shows how much of a leader you are. You're able to lead. So could you talk a little bit about that? How was your progression through the leadership structure to this current leadership role that you play at the university?
So when I came to University of Houston, I came just to be a researcher to have an impact on the African American community, especially the Third Ward, which is right across the street from the university. It was a big draw to come to U of H to do that work. But I noticed that we were in a place where we had a national search for a department chair. And I've never been a person to be a complainer. I've always been a person that's very solution-oriented. And I began to see some of the candidates, and I thought to myself, I think I could bring more to the table.
Of course.
And so instead of complaining about what the other candidates didn't have, I said, why not put my hat in the ring, right?
Excellent.
And then there was some discouragement, well, how can you keep your research going and, serve in leadership roles? And I dealt with some of that pushback, but ultimately the faculty voted to select me over the external candidates.
Excellent.
And in that space, I think I began to tap into another passion, which is building things, building infrastructures that can have lasting change. And so being a department chair set the stage for me to become Associate Dean for Research. In my role as department chair, we saw expenditures increase by 400%. Wow. As an ADR, Associate Dean for Research, federal funding has gone up 200 and something percent.
Wow.
And so those numbers have been impactful for the university, which has opened doors for me to be able to figure out how can I affect the next level up, the next level up, the next level up. I think I then got into a place of, well, maybe leadership is what I'm supposed to do. And so the question is, what's the right path? I never thought that I had an interest in being a president, so being a provost or something along those lines wasn't all that interesting to me. But being in that research space was something I was extremely passionate about, being able to push the science, create solutions, have an impact on the community, and so forth. And so it became clear to me that that ADR role, Associate Dean for Research, it was fun for me. And then pursuing, this associate VP role with the hopes of one day being a vice president for research, are sort of the things that are much more in line with my passion and sort of personality. Right.
Wow, this is very nice. So now let's get back to the meat of the crux, which is health disparities caused by inequities. Could you summarize how a young person listening to this could make a career out of this?
Yeah,
especially African American, Latinx or other underrepresented in medicine group. Just listening to you, how could you tell them how they can actually, what are the priorities in health disparities, health inequities research that they can prioritize to make a career of?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, be in touch with what's going on. We all have family members who are suffering from something, whether it's mental health challenges, whether it's physical health challenges, whether it's financial challenges. And you see the strain that has on the family. You think about those holiday dinners where you come back and everyone's in the same room and just the tension that exists. It's not that we don't love each other, we're just tired and stressed out and finally get to air it all out in front of everyone. Mm. And so I think if you can tap into what people's real lived experiences are, and if you have that sort of ambition of wanting to improve people's quality of life, there's a lot that can be done. Yeah. I think we need folks who have passion to do the work and not just doing the work because the money is available. We need folks who can make the relationships in the community and do it with a sense of partnership and not from this ivory tower approach of, because I have a PhD, I have all the answers. Mm-hmm. We need people that could think outside the box, that can think outside of a single disciplinary sort of approach to some of the challenges that we see, which is what I think has given me a leg up by not always being in the psychology field, whether it's physics, whether it's going into some of the bio basis of behaviors and things of that nature. Just allows you to think differently. And so I think, health issues will be here for centuries to come.
Long time.
It's been centuries to create the situation that we're in now, which I alluded to today in the presentation. And so it's going to take some time to fix it. Structures don't change over time.
Yes.
But we need people to fight the good fight so that maybe their grandchildren doesn't have the same experiences that they had.
Very good. So my last question to you then has to be around, you've answered the question to the individual, but how should the individual then consider all the other stuff going around? That is the community context, the organizational context, the public policy context. How should one really think about all these things as they bring solutions to health inequities and health disparities?
Mm-hmm. So I think for me, everything is connected. Everything is connected. I mean, we can talk about the education, K through 12 education experience. If you're living in a high stress environment, if you didn't have breakfast that morning, how are you going to focus when you go to school? Yeah. If you can't focus while you're in school, how are you going to get good grades in order to even qualify to pursue higher education? All these things, when we think about sidewalks, lack of green space, that's policy issues. All these things are interconnected. If you're struggling with obesity, but you don't have any place safe to exercise, all these things are connected. Mm-hmm. And so I think being able to understand that we are born with some things, our sort of biological makeup and history. We have a culture that we sort of live in, things that we eat, how we see the world, and so forth. We have a community in which we live in. We have a state, a country in which we live in. All these things have layers that have a direct bearing on our well-being. And so that's why doing this work from various disciplinary advantage points, while also including the lived experience of people who deal with this day in and day out, is what is needed in order to move the needle on health disparities. You can't do it from one discipline. You can't do it without the community's help. And your discipline is not going to train you to have all the answers. It just isn't.
Excellent. Well, I would like to first of all thank Dr. Pamela Straker, who has orchestrated the BHDC Voices and has arranged for us to be able to interview you today. Your experiences have really been outstanding, and you've been able to, pursue your dreams to get to where you are today. We feel you are a very strong example of what, self-motivation really means. And I hope that all the young people listening to us today can pick up something from this, learn from it, and be able to say, whoa, other people are making it, other people are doing it, maybe I can also do it. Especially in the space of health disparities, health inequities research, there's just a lot to be done. And what you've shared with us today is just incredible. So I would like to thank you for coming to Downstate today to give us a talk and also to be part of this BHDC Voices podcast program. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.